On a similar topic, for many of us, the summer months come with more opportunities or occasions to drink alcohol. But what if you're looking to cut down on drinking for any variety of reasons, or maybe you're worried that it may be becoming a problem for you or a loved one? I talked today with Dr. Sarah Church. She's a clinical psychologist and addiction medicine specialist, and also the founder of Whole View in the New York area, just about what to keep in mind this summer if these are topics on your mind.
Summer drinking, like you said, there's more barbecues and picnics and outdoor activities there where people are getting together and drinking. But I think that the biggest thing that is different in the summer months is dehydration. So alcohol itself is dehydrating, and then the heat is dehydrating. So those two things in combination, people can get really dehydrated when they're drinking. So one of the things we always encourage people to do is to alternate with water in between to make sure they're getting enough water and hydration throughout the time that if they choose to drink.
When it comes to being mindful, things not going to a place where they're out of control, not even talking to an addiction standpoint, why is that so important to, be conscious of, what you're doing when it comes to alcohol?
Yeah, I think when people are mindful in terms of their drinking, they're more likely to think about it ahead of time. So take a minute, set a limit. I don't want to have more than 3 drinks tonight. And then count your drinks as you're going through. Make sure you're actually paying attention, as opposed to just drinking without thinking about it, drinking mindlessly, where you end up probably drinking more than you meant to, because you don't have a limit. You counted your drinks. So those are really important sort of boundaries to set. And then it's also, sort of in terms of choosing your beverage, we want people to think about choosing a beverage maybe that has a lower alcohol content. So maybe a summer ale instead of an IPA, so really thinking a little bit about that ahead of time and during the time that you're drinking. And then also, mindfully savoring the beverage, right? So choosing something you actually enjoy and then sipping it slowly or drink it slowly and really enjoy it, and you can take some time during the time that you're drinking to just take a few deep breaths, to mindfully be aware of, I'm having this really nice drink that I enjoy, and I'm drinking it a little more slowly as opposed to just sort of gulping it down.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there may be a variety of reasons why keeping those things in mind are important, depending on what your situation is. But, as opposed to, mindlessly drinking, not having a limit, binge drinking, maybe what can, I know there's such a variety, but what can the consequences of that be for someone, at any age?
Right. So, I mean, in terms of the acute issues that can come up, when people over drink, they can have accidents, they can have, there can be sexual assaults, there can be all sorts of even just saying things that you didn't mean to say when you've had too much to drink, so all different kinds of negative consequences, including hangover the next day, not, anxiety the next day. So there's the acute issues, and then there's the long-term issues. When people end up over drinking a lot over a long period of time, they're increasing their chances of heart disease, of cancer, of liver disease. So there's the acute issues, and there's sort of the long-term issues that they're, the health consequences that they're thinking about. There can also be relationship issues over time. If people are getting into arguments or uh, you know, um, where there's discrepancies in terms of the amount that people are drinking in a couple, there could be a lot of arguments around that as well.
Sometimes for some folks, as we know, drinking can become a real problem. It can become, alcoholism is a disease that is really challenging. If someone is wondering, if they have gotten to that point, what is sort of your advice in approaching, okay, maybe I do have a drinking problem?
Yeah. So what I always tell people is if you're worried about it, you're thinking about it, talk to somebody. So there are a lot of psychologists and social workers who are trained to help people sort through those issues. Like, whether is it a problem? Is it not a problem? Should I cut down? Should I stop? Those are good things to talk about, and then they can also talk to their medical doctor. There are 3 FDA approved medicines that can help people reduce or stop drinking. So they can talk to their doctor. Their doctor might, prescribe a medicine for them. And then there's also, self-help groups like AA or moderation management that people can go to, free meetings to talk about it with other people who may be struggling with similar things. And there's actually a website, myrelationshipwithalcohol.com, that people can go to. There's some quizzes on there, and there's some information on there. They could just read about it, learn about it, and get more information on it.
It's not like you can't go to a picnic or a party or a bar or whatever, and not have fun while also not drinking. There's other ways to engage and socialize. And, if that is problematic for you, leaving that out.
Yeah, well, there's a couple things in there. One thing that you just reminded me of that I always encourage people to do is when they're going to an event where they know there's going to be alcohol, try to think about the things that are going on that they can focus on that are not related to alcohol. So, maybe there's somebody they really want to get to know, or they want to do some networking, or there's an activity like a game that people are playing, or there's dancing, or, there's different things to do that are not necessarily related to alcohol. So really focus on those things that they want to get out of that event or that meeting or that party.
Yeah.
So thinking about, some of the alcohol related things they want to do there. So there's a lot of great non-alcoholic options out there now. Their non-alcoholic beer is one of the most popular drinks sold at Whole Foods now. There's some
Mhm.
so you're not alone if you're choosing a non-alcoholic option. And also, you can alternate between alcoholic and non-alcoholic options. So, you might not want to have water in between. Maybe you have a non-alcoholic beer or a non-alcoholic mocktail or something like that. So those are really good options for reducing your drink count. And if you've gotten to your drink count, you've hit that 3, you've set your limit, maybe you switch to non-alcoholic options after you've had your allotment for the day.
What are some strategies people can utilize, if they're faced with that person, maybe a close friend who's like, come on, drink, 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 and you don't want to, but you feel uncomfortable? What's a good way to handle that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different things. And one that you sort of mentioned is if you have a friend or someone who's with you who knows what your plan is, so they can sort of support you in that. So it's always good to have a buddy.
Yeah.
Someone who's also maybe not drinking as much or trying not to drink as much. So that can be helpful in those situations where there's peer pressure. And then also rehearsing what the response is going to be. If they know there's a certain person who always puts pressure on them to drink or to, like maybe they say, I just don't do shots anymore. Or, having that rehearsed response in their head, like, I've got a meeting tomorrow, so I don't want to overdrink tonight because I want to be fresh for the morning. Or, having some kind of plan in their head for how they respond to that person can be really helpful. And then rehearsing it a little bit so they've got that response ready when the occasion arises. I mean, part of it is sort of choosing who you want to spend your time with. Like there's somebody who's really pressuring you way more than you're comfortable with. Maybe you leave early, maybe, that's another thing we encourage people to do is go late, leave early, or another, strategies. So if towards the end of the night where people have had more than maybe you're comfortable with, maybe you just leave and, go home. Just to know that a lot of people don't realize, but the treatments for alcohol use disorder are actually really effective. They're as equally effective as the treatments for any other chronic medical disorder like diabetes or asthma or hypertension. So people sometimes think, oh, I'm not going to go to a doctor. I'm not going to go to somebody to talk about this because those things don't work. It's actually that's not actually true. The treatments are actually really effective. So there are a lot of options out there, whether they're medication or there's psychotherapy or self-help groups. All of those things are really helpful. It can really help people, reduce the amount they're drinking or help them stop if they want to.
Yeah, and that actually just sparked one other question for me. If it's not necessarily you personally, but someone you're close to, maybe it's your partner, maybe it's a friend, where you're noticing, that things are repetitively getting out of control or poor choices are, being made as a result of the drinking, that's a difficult topic to approach, especially depending on what your relationship with that person is. What's your advice there? Is that something to bring up? Is that something people need to handle on their own? How would you advise, kind of approaching that for the first time?
Yeah. So if it's someone you care about and love, I definitely encourage you to talk about it with them, but, approach it with love and caring, and that you care about this person. And you really, you've noticed that they've increased their drinking and you're worried about them. And you wondered if they wanted to talk about it. And, if they were interested in getting some help, you could help them find that help, and you want to sort of pick the time that you do that. You have that time. And you know your loved one best. So is it better to talk to them the day after where they're feeling maybe regretful for what happened? Maybe that's a time to talk because they'd be more open to making a change. But you definitely don't want to talk to them when they've had 5, 6 drinks.
Yeah.
You want to pick a time where they're open to it, where they can hear it, where you're calm and feeling supportive and caring.